Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 10th Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy. My name is Hillel Neuer. I'm the Executive Director of United Nations Watch. I'm happy to speak to you on behalf of 25 non-governmental organizations who are co-sponsoring today's event. A number of our partners are here in the room with us. Some could not be here, but have sent their spokespersons, individuals who will speak on country situations around the world that require urgent attention. It's a privilege to be here at the United Nations, sitting right below the Human Rights Council, the highest intergovernmental human rights body of the United Nations, which will open its 2018 session next week, when foreign ministers from around the world will gather here with the obligation, the duty, to address urgent situations of human rights around the world. And we meet now on the anniversary, the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was 7 decades ago when Eleanor Roosevelt, René Cassin, Charles Malik, P.C. Chang, John Humphrey, and other eminent figures met here on the banks of Lake Geneva in the aftermath of the Nazi atrocities to reaffirm the principles of human dignity. They adopted the Declaration of Human Rights on December 10th, 1948, and next week we'll begin here at the United Nations the official commemorations of this momentous anniversary. And they also created the Commission on Human Rights. After 6 decades, Kofi Annan said the Commission on Human Rights was not working. He said that members were joining because of politicization, he said that there was selectivity. Members were joining to shield their own records, to protect the records of others. And he said that the commission became tainted by politicization and selectivity. Indeed, said Kofi Annan, it had begun to cast a shadow upon the reputation of the United Nations as a whole. And he pointed to the membership, and he pointed to the selectivity of its work, and he proposed a new body, the Human Rights Council. And a year later, they created the new and improved Human Rights Council, created on March 15th, 2006 in Resolution 60/251. And the new and improved United Nations Human Rights Council was charged to address urgent situations. Members would be elected according to criteria. According to criteria, they would have to show that they have a record of promoting human rights. Members, according to Section 8, that do not promote human rights can be removed, those who commit gross and systematic violations. Now, 12 years after the creation of the new and improved Human Rights Council, where do we stand today? Now, there's been some action. The Council has taken action on Syria. There have been resolutions on Sri Lanka. There have been some resolutions on North Korea. But sadly, a great many amount of situations around the world continue to go ignored. Indeed, if we looked at some of the worst abusers of human rights affecting billions of victims, their situation goes ignored. When the Council meets next week for a month-long main session, there will be no resolution on China, even though 1/5 of the world's population, more than 1.3 billion people, are denied any form of basic human rights. And you'll hear about it more today from our human rights heroes from China. And despite the fact that Liu Xiaobo, who only wanted democracy for his country, was crushed and eventually leading to his death after imprisonment. And Wang Binzhang, the democracy leader, continues to be in prison. And tomorrow at our main session, you'll see a very large exhibit that we'll have of political prisoners indicating how many days they continue to be wrongfully imprisoned. And sadly, next week when we open, there will be no resolution. As for the past 12 years, there has been no resolution on Cuba, despite the fact that peaceful activists are beaten or languish in prison, and where the suspicious death of legendary dissident Oswaldo Paya remains uninvestigated. And we'll hear tomorrow from Guillermo Farinas Hernandez the truth, someone who survived Cuban prisons for 11 years, the truth of what's really happening in Cuba. And sadly, there have been in the past 12 years no resolutions on Zimbabwe, a country that began as the breadbasket of Africa and became a basket case. And despite the brutality for decades of the Mugabe regime, which has recently departed. And we'll hear in a moment from one of the leading dissidents from Zimbabwe. And there have been, sadly, in the past 12 years, no resolutions, no special sessions, no commissions of inquiry on Turkey. And sitting next to me, you'll hear in a moment from Asli Erdogan about what's happening in Turkey and her situation, where more than 100,000 teachers, judges, academics, government officials were fired a year and a half ago by President Erdogan, with journalists like Orhan Kemal Cengiz and many others indicted on false, trumped-up charges. And there have been no resolutions on human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, even as its military has killed thousands of civilians, and even though it remains a country, despite the promises of reform, where women are subjugated, religious freedom is trampled, and beheadings still continue. And there have been no resolutions on Russia, despite the gross abuses, and we'll hear shortly from one of the heroes of Russia. Now, even worse, it's much worse actually than the fact that they're ignored, because that's bad enough. But what is worse is that many of the worst abusers get rewarded. They get a false badge of international legitimacy. They get elected to be upstairs. When the council meets next week, there'll be 47 member states. And even though Kofi Annan said the main problem of the old commission, the discredited commission, the disgraced commission, was the membership, the members who will meet upstairs will include a number of democracies and a number of countries that are partial democracies, but a great amount of the worst regimes. We're going to have next week Cuba, always a member of the Human Rights Council, Venezuela, a country that's been destroyed, and we'll hear tomorrow from Mayor Antonio Ledesma, who just escaped from being a political prisoner in Venezuela. That country was re-elected to the Human Rights Council, and there are at least 3 rapporteurs, UN human rights investigators of the Council, who disgracefully defend the regime, and I will name them. Alfred de Zayas, who was the only expert allowed into Venezuela, and he praised the regime, and he posted pictures of food when people are starving, when the New York Times is reporting starving babies in the hospital, and he's tweeting pictures of food in supermarkets. Propaganda of the worst kind for the Maduro regime. That's one of the Human Rights Council investigators. And another one, the expert on food, who should be speaking every day for the hungry people of Venezuela. Hillel Elver, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, a position created by Cuba, has been silent on Venezuela, and even worse, if you look at her tweets, a few times she tweeted Venezuelan propaganda, blaming the opposition for the problems of starvation, that people have to scrounge for food in Venezuela. And sadly, next week, and I'll just mention one other name, the upstairs is meeting the Human Rights Council Advisory Committee, 18 experts, and the longest-serving UN human rights expert of the Council, Monsieur Jean Ziegler, who was appointed by Cuba, nominated in 2004 by the Chavez regime, and who a few months ago, sitting at the United Nations on a panel, openly defended the Maduro regime and attacked the dissidents and heroes, one of whom we have here with us today. And sadly, this is what we're facing, and the membership also includes Qatar and Saudi Arabia and many other regimes, and sadly, this is what we're facing. And that's why, to conclude, we feel it is necessary, on the eve of the Human Rights Council opening on the 70th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights, to bring human rights heroes from around the world, and I've mentioned them. I'll just mention them briefly, the people that we have. Sorry. You have the names in front of you. We're going to begin with a number of them today. The rest will speak tomorrow. And I'll stop here and I'll pass the floor to Hans van Balen, who's a member of the European Parliament. He's president. Sorry, I'm going to first introduce Alfred Moses, the chair of United Nations Watch, the former